Understanding God's plan, lesson 4. We've been through the creation, through the fall, through all the way through Noah, and where they fit in God's plan and how God had planned out from the beginning. And so what I was hoping we could see in this particular study is how all of it ties together. And when it started in Genesis, it was pointing towards Jesus from the time of creation. We just finished the Christmas season, and John, where it said, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. We know that in the beginning, God already had the plan of salvation developed before man was ever created, because God's smarter than we are. So anyway, I wanted to continue from there, and we saw how went through Noah and the Tower of Babel, what it had to do with how it's leading up to who we're going to talk about today. And so we're in Genesis, the 11th chapter, verse 31. It says, Terah took his son Abram, his grandson Lot, Haran's son, and his daughter-in-law Sarai, his son Abram's wife, and they set out together from Ur of the Chaldees to go to the land of Canaan. Now it says they started from Ur of the Chaldees, that's where they left, and they left to go to the land of Canaan. It says, and when they came to Haran, they settled there. Terah lived 205 years and died in Haran. So, previously we saw how God had separated out all the people of the earth and the different people groups and so on. And the reason that He did that. And why did God confuse their languages at the Tower of Babel? And so as a matter of review, in Genesis 11:7 it says, come, let us go down there and confuse their language so that they will not understand one another's speech. Now look at verse 8. It says, so from there the Lord scattered them over the face of the whole earth, and they stopped building the city. Now, this is Randy's opinion, and I think the reason that God did not want them there together is because, remember what they said? They said, let's make a name for ourselves. And they built a city and they built the tower. And so while they were doing that, God confused their tongues, is the way it says in the King James Version, and made them speak different languages. And they had to find groups and different ones that spoke their own language so they could converse with them. It's kind of hard to get things done when you can't talk to each other. So anyway, it says, so from there the Lord scattered them across the face of the whole earth, and they stopped building the city. So they stopped building the city. They were trying to make a name for themselves. And as far as I'm concerned, the reason that He did that was because God had a plan, and He needed to get into the earth in a, quote, legal way. Some people get irritated when I use terms like that, but that's the best way to explain it. God had to come back into the earth. He had to come in and save man that He had created to begin with, because He gave earth to man. He created it for man. Everything that's created here was created for us. And He gave it to man, gave it to us. So it was all of us that inherited what came from Adam because of it. And Adam and Eve determined that they could handle things by themselves, and they didn't need God, and they didn't need His help. And when they did that, they found out that they did need His help, and it was too late. So it started down a bad path. It says, God had taken man and distributed them all over the earth. For man to be redeemed, God needed to find somebody that He could come into the earth with and make a covenant with, to pay for the penalty of what was put on man because of man did it to himself. God didn't punish Adam and Eve for eating from the tree. He just told them, He said, on the day you eat from this tree, you will surely die. That's what He said. He didn't say, on the day you eat from this tree, I'm going to beat you up, I'm going to punish you, I'm going to make you sick. He didn't say any of that. He said, this is what will happen. And basically it's because they didn't need His help. They didn't want His help. They didn't need God to tell them what was right and wrong. They could decide for themselves. How do you get the kind of man that you would need in order to make this kind of covenant with? How would you do that? And I've put down here the only way that God could get into the earth, he had to enter through man. If he was going to save earth, and man was the one that had possession of the earth, and man was the one that had the authority here, then the salvation for man had to come through man. And we could see that was not working out very well, because in Noah's day, it said Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. The only one found righteous enough to save out of the whole world was Noah and his family. So that was not working out very well. So God had to he was going to make a covenant relationship with a man, and that's what he needed to do. If mankind had stayed in one place and spoken one language, that would have cut down the chances, as far as I'm concerned, of being able to find somebody that you can enter into the world through and through their bloodline in order to save all of mankind from Adam right on through. So it had to have a way of getting in there. If they'd all stayed together, in my estimation, it's the reason they were scattered, is because if you have a group over here and a group over here and a group over here, a group over here, and they're not connected, if this one goes bad and this one goes bad, you still have a chance with somebody in each one of these. And that's a simplified version. So we'll look at Genesis 12th chapter, verse 1. The Lord said to Abram, now who is Abram? He's Terah's son, who moved with his father from Ur of the Chaldees. They were going to Canaan, and instead of going to Canaan, they stopped in Haran, and his father Terah died there. It doesn't say how many years they were there, but he wound up dying there. It says, the Lord said to Abram, go out from your land, your relatives, and your father's house to the land that I will show you. What land did he say? He didn't say, did he? He's the one I'll show you. Okay. I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you. I will curse those who treat you with contempt, and all the peoples of the earth will be blessed through you. So he's talking to Abram, and so here begins a covenant relationship that God is making with Abram. And he told him, what I need you to do is this, and if you do this, then I will do this. Okay. And I had a couple of questions here. Had God found that one man that he could covenant with so that he could redeem man? Had he found him in Abram? And so the question is, what were I put Abraham's, his name hadn't been changed yet. What were Abram's qualifications? What qualified him for a covenant relationship with God? What do we know about him so far? We don't know much about him. Pardon me? Well, I could say this is availability. That could be it. What had to be done at this point would make him the man that God could make a covenant with. So there was a reason that he could use Abram. And you'll see in Genesis 15:6, it says, Abraham believed the Lord, and he credited it to him as righteousness. James 2:23 says, so the scripture also fulfilled that says, Abraham believed God, and it was credited to him for righteousness, and he was called God's friend. So what made Abram qualified for a covenant relationship with God? He believed God. He was one that would believe. He's the one that would listen to what God said. God could make a covenant with him because he would believe God and he would trust God. How did God know that? How many had he tried up until that point? There's one qualification for us to be righteous. And what is it? To believe God. To trust God. To trust in the salvation comes through Jesus Christ. How much work does it require? How much work does it require? Okay. Abraham believed God, but how do we know that he did? How do we know that Abraham believed God? Or Abram at this time. How do we know that he believed God? He says he believed God in the 15th chapter. God counted that for him as righteousness. So how do we know that he believed God? Genesis 12. We'll read it. Genesis 12:4. So Abram went as the Lord had told him. Okay. What did God told him? He said, I want you to leave your home, pack up everything you have, and move to the land that I will show you. So Abraham went as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he left Haran. He was not a spring chicken when he was told to leave his land. Now, what did it take? Well, let me read the rest of this. He took his wife Sarai, his nephew Lot, all the possessions they had accumulated, and the people he had acquired in Haran, and they set out for the land of Canaan. So that wasn't just like if we ever moved from the house we're in, it'd be rare. The reason being is because moving is hard. Moving is not fun. It's difficult to move. And I don't know that I want to. I'm 70. I don't know that I want to. But here he is. He packs up everything he has at 75, and he does what he's been told. What made him righteous was that he believed God, and what proved it was by his actions. Because God said, go to the land that I'll tell you which one to go to. And so he just headed out in whatever direction it was, according to what we can see here, because he didn't say, I want you to pick up everything you have, and I want you to move to Haran, from Haran to Canaan. He didn't say that in the scripture we just read. He said, I want you to go to the land I'll show you. In order to ratify the covenant with God, Abram had to do something. There's something that had to be done. When you sign a contract with somebody, you sign a contract and you agree to do certain things. And in that contract, they agree to do certain things, and that's the way you fulfill the contract. For instance, if I go to buy a car and I want to finance the car, they draw up a contract. Their part is to let me drive the car. My part is to make the payments. If I quit making the payments, they come get the car. Isn't that right? So in order to make it, so there's obligations on both parties in order to do that. So God is obligating himself to a man. Does God have to do that? God could have just wiped everything out, wiped the whole earth out, just blown it out of space. Say, look, I'm tired of this crowd. I'm going to make me another earth and make some more men and women, some that might listen to me. He could have done that, couldn't he? But he didn't. What was Abram's responsibility in relation to the covenant with God? He says, so Abram went. That's all he did. He went as the Lord had told him. Abram was 75 years old, and he went to Haran. And when he left Haran, he took his wife Sarai, his nephew Lot, all the possessions they had accumulated, and the people, catch what they're saying, and the people he had acquired in Haran. What is that? The people that he had acquired? Okay, he had slaves. When did slavery start? Way a long time ago. It's not a new modern invention that happened in the United States and all the rest of the world was innocent for all of time, and we're a horrible nation because we had slavery here and kept it for a good while. They had slaves back then. And the people he had acquired in Haran, and they set out to the land of Canaan. So what was God's responsibility in this covenant? He told Abram, this is what you do, and this is what I'll do. He said, I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you. I will curse those who treat you with contempt, and all the peoples of the earth will be blessed through you. So Abram's side of this covenant was, you leave and go. God's side of this was, who was giving the most? Who had the most to give? God did. And I think I put this down here somewhere further on, but think about this for just a minute. If Elon Musk, who's worth estimated $250 billion, something like that, and if he called me and said, Randy, listen, here's what I want to do. I want you to take everything you own, and I'm going to take everything I own, and we're going to throw it in one big pot, and we're going to divide it up. Who would come out ahead? He carries more pocket money probably than what everything I own is worth. And all of us put together, the man's worth about $250 billion. That's a lot of change. So I would come out better. So who's going to come out better in this deal? God or Abram? Abram. So he has to follow what God said. So Abram, what was Abram's responsibility? It was to go. He said, the Lord said, go out into the land, your relatives and your father's house, and to the land that I will show you. The covenant requires God will make Abraham a great nation. Abram, I keep saying Abraham because that's who he became. It's Abram. Abram, it was to leave your home and go to the land that God would show him. That's the two of them. You can see side by side the things that were required of this covenant. God came, Abram didn't come to God and ask God to make a covenant with him, did he? God sought him out. And because he sought him out, he found a man that he can make a covenant with. Now, how many men do you think he checked with, that God checked with over the years? Why did it take so many thousands of years before he ever got to Abram? Could it be that he couldn't find anybody that would make a covenant with, that would do what he said? You can see that's pretty obvious in the land of when they got past the flood, and then they all gathered together in one spot in the land of Shinar and decided to build a city and a tower and make a name for themselves. All there together. Nowhere in that scripture, you can read all you want to there in the 11th chapter of the book of Genesis, and nowhere does it say that they said anything about God, trusted God, or believed God at all. Even after all the world being wiped out except for Noah, then all of his descendants come down through his descendants, and here they are building a tower and a city to make a name for themselves. So man was not really a good candidate to make covenant with. It was hard to find a good one. But anyway, I said who had the greater burden, and I have the example here. I talked about Elon Musk, and I knew that was coming up. And I asked the question, how many men do you think God offered this deal to? We don't know. Now, we can say, well, God knew which one would believe, and that's the reason he made an agreement with Abram. Or it could have been, what did it say about Terah back earlier when it says he packed up his whole family, Abram and his wife and Lot and all of them in Ur, the land of Ur of the Chaldeans, and moved to go to Canaan. It says that he was going to Canaan, but it said he stopped in Haran. Could God have talked to Terah and said, look, I want you to go to the land that I will show you, but Terah gave up too quick? We don't know. I'm just as conjecturous as possible. That's what I said here. Did God offer that to Terah? There's a lot of years that went by. When we make a covenant with God, we always get the better deal. That's just plain and simple. But this was just the beginning with Abram. This is the first thing he tells him to do, and this is the first thing he tells him that's going to happen. He was 75 years old, and you'll see in that next paragraph here I put, if you slip from here over to the 14th chapter of the book of Genesis, you'll see that Lot had separated from Abraham, and he wound up in the land of Sodom and Gomorrah, and these kings came in, and they took him captive and took all the stuff from these cities and hauled him off. And so the kings talked to Abraham. I'm making a long story short here, as short as possible. And it's to talk to Abram. He took 318 of his trained men. Okay, if he had 318 trained men, how many people did Abram have? I have no idea. It could have been 1,000, 1,500, 2,000. It could have been a bunch of them. So when he got ready to leave Haran and go to the land of Canaan, it wasn't just like us packing up and moving somewhere, as much trouble as that would be. He had to move all of these, all of his family, all of his goods, all of his sheep, all of his cattle, all of his camels, everything that he had to move it all and move from that land. That was a pretty big act of faith, wasn't it? He took his wife Sarai, his nephew Lot, all the possessions they had accumulated, and the people he had acquired in Haran, and they set out for the land of Canaan. And I had this map in here before, so we can kind of get an idea. Here is where they were with Terah, and they moved to Haran, and they stopped there. And now Abram is moving from Haran over here to Canaan. What did they drive? How many moving trucks did it take? Most of their transportation right on for thousands of years was your right foot and your left foot. If you were doing, pardon me? Pat and Charlie. I don't know where that came up with. That's what I always said. It was Pat and Charlie. But anyway. And if you were well blessed, you'd have a camel or a donkey or a horse or something to ride. But basically, it was very, very primitive. And so they had to, in order for him to get from here to here, in order for him to get from here to here was the same thing. And then to get from here to here with all these people that he had with him, with all these goods, with all this. Think about how many cattle and how many sheep and stuff it would take to have just to feed the people that he had with him. Think about all the land that they have to graze in order to feed the animals and what they. This was a tough project for him to do. But Abram, when God told him to move, what did he do? He packed his bag, got on his way. Okay, in the 13th chapter, we're in the 12th chapter. The 13th chapter is when Lot and Abram split up. In the 14th chapter is when Abram goes and rescues Lot. And when you're reading that chapter, that's when we're introduced to, in that section, we're introduced to Melchizedek, who we could talk for a long time about who he was, because it's hard, we don't really know. Brings us to 15, chapter 15. We were in, when God first spoke to Abram and made a covenant with Abram, first thing he told him to do was leave home, and if you did, I'll do this for you. 15th chapter. After these events, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. Do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield. Your reward will be very great. So he speaks to him again. But Abram says, Lord God, what can you give me since I am childless? What was it that God said that he was going to do for Abram if he left his land and went to the land that he showed him? He's going to make him into a great nation. And Abram saying, last conversation we had, God, you're going to make me a great nation? Now I'm ad-libbing a little. He said, I don't have any kids. I don't know if you noticed, but I don't have any kids. And he says, and the heir of my house is Eliezer of Damascus. Abram continued, look, you have given me no offspring, so a slave born in my house will be my heir. In other words, he's saying, when I die, everything I have is going to go to my head servant and to his family, because I don't have any children. Does this sound like Abram's doubting a little bit and beginning to waver a little bit? Yes. Does God get upset when we doubt and we waver? He can handle that. God had told Abram what he would do. It was hard to become a great nation when you didn't have any descendants, and the only heir that Abram had was his slave. So, Genesis 15:4. Now the word of the Lord came to him, this one will not be your heir. Now how old was Abram when he left the land of Haran to go to Canaan? He's 75. And how many children does he have? None. Zero. Not one kid does he have. Instead, one who comes from your own body will be your heir. He took him outside and said, now listen to what God's doing. He says, look at the sky and count the stars if you're able to count them. Then he said to him, your offspring will be that numerous. Abram believed the Lord, and he credited it to him as righteousness. When God told him that, he believed him, although he was having doubts. And God is expanding this covenant. Well, he's going to expect more out of Abram, if Abram's going to keep his end of the bargain. He said, how can I know I will possess it? God does not mind if we have questions. And then 15:9 he said to him, bring me. Now this is what he just told Abram what he was going to do. God told him, this is some more of my part of the covenant. Now this is your part. This is something you're going to have to do. He says, bring me a 3-year-old cow, a 3-year-old female goat, a 3-year-old ram, a turtle dove, and a young pigeon. So he brought all these to him, split them down the middle, and laid the pieces opposite each other, but he did not cut up the birds. Birds of prey came down on the carcasses, but Abram drove them away. As the sun was setting, a deep sleep fell on Abram, and suddenly great terror and darkness descended on him. Abram listened to God. God said, I'll do this for you. Now here's what you need to do. And he cut up the sacrifice. He split them, and he divided the parts, and he put them in two different, one on this side and one on this side of each one of the offerings. But he didn't light a fire because he was waiting for God to light the fire. Does that take faith? Would that take a little bit of faith for you to do that? If God came to you and said, what was the first thing that God asked of Abram in order to establish his covenant? How did Abram respond? He responded by doing it. What was the second thing he asked him to make? He asked him, he said, I want you to make a blood sacrifice, if you will. We'll use that term. I want you to kill these animals. You're going to spill the blood of animals as your part of furthering this covenant we have between us. And Abraham responded. He says, when the sun had set and it was dark, a smoking fire pot and a flaming torch appeared and passed between the divided animals. On that day, the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, I give this land to your offspring from the brook of Egypt to the Euphrates River, the land of the Kenites, the Kenizzites, the Cadmonites, Hittites, Perizzites, Rephaim, Amorites, Canaanites, Gershites, and Jebusites. I'm giving all of this land to you because you believed me and you did what I said. That was your part of this covenant. This is my part. God asked Abraham to leave his land. He did. He asked him to spill the blood of animals, and he did. In covenant relationships, something is expected from each side in order to keep the relationship. Not only did, at this point, he had told him before he was going to make him a great nation, now he set the boundaries and says, all this land that all these people have, all this land of all these people, this is going to be your land. This is where your family, this is where your people are going to grow up. This is going to be their land. And that's what he did. And as God required more, he gave more to Abram. In the 16th chapter, Abram and Sarah decided he's slacking off. He's not upholding what he said. We need to help God out. Did we ever get that way? We're going to help God out, right? And Abram and Sarai say, we're going to help God out here a little bit. So Sarai says, why don't you take my handmaiden Hagar? And you have a son with her. And that will be your heir. At this point, I can imagine Edna telling Tommy that. Can't you? And what would be worse if she offered that and Tommy said, okay. If that ever happens, Tommy, she's testing you. Okay. But Abram said, okay, sounds like a good idea to me. So he has a son, and his name is Ishmael. And that takes us to chapter 17, verse 1. When Abraham was how old? When Abram was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to him saying, I am God Almighty, live in my presence and be blameless. I will establish my covenant between me and you, and I will multiply you greatly. He said, I'll multiply you greatly. Now, how old was he when they left the land of Canaan? The land of Haran? 75. So how many years has it been? 24 years, and Sarai has not had a baby yet. But Hagar has. I will establish my covenant between me and you, and I'll multiply you greatly. Then Abram fell face down, and God spoke with him. As for me, my covenant is with you. You will become the father of many nations. That's what you're going to become. Your name will no longer be Abram, but your name will be Abraham. Now, here's opinion for all it's worth. Do you know what Abraham means? It means father of a multitude or father of many nations. Okay. Now, Randy's going to give you some opinion here, and there's other people I share this opinion with, and it's not original with me. God making this covenant with Abram. So what he does is he changes his name to Abraham. He changes his name to father of a multitude. So Abram comes into a new town, and he walks in there, and he said, I'm Abraham. He said, how many kids do you have? He said, one. He said, wait a minute. Now you're saying your name is father of a multitude, father of many nations. That's your name. So every time Abraham said that name, he was confessing what God said he was going to do for him. He was saying the right things. He agreed to that name, and he said that name knowing at the time that he had one son. He said, I will make you extremely fruitful and will make nations and kings come from you. I will keep my covenant between me and you and your future offspring throughout their generations as an everlasting covenant to be your God and the God of your offspring after you. 8th verse. And to you and your future offspring I will give the land where you are residing, all the land of Canaan as an eternal possession, and I will be their God. And I already answered this question, but the question is, why did he change his name to Abram to Abraham? And I think that I like my answer. So if you don't, you can come up with your own. But I think that's what it was. He wanted Abraham talking the right language. God also said to Abraham, as for you, you and your offspring after you throughout their generations are to keep my covenant. Okay, this is a covenant not just to Abram and to Abraham, but to all of his descendants. This is my covenant which you are to keep between me and you and your offspring after you. Every one of your males must be circumcised. You must circumcise the flesh of your foreskin to serve as a sign of the covenant between me and you. Now, does this sound like a strange thing? Can you imagine? And anytime I've ever gotten to the script, I have to go here. How many men was it he took with him to rescue Lot and all of them? 318. We don't know how many men there was altogether. But these men that have been in his household for years know that this Abraham talks to God. And Abraham comes out and tells all of them, he said, God has spoken to me, and today, all of you men, all of you boys that's at least 8 days old are going to be circumcised. And I can just see the men looking at each other and say, what did he say? What does this have to do with anything? I'll tell you. Each step of the way, God promised Abraham something, and he required something on him. First was to leave his home. Next was to shed the blood of animals. And the next was to shed his own blood and the blood of all of his household in order to ratify this covenant. This would set them apart from everybody else for years to come. And for all generations, this would set them apart. This is the only one this covenant was made with. So that's what it did. 17:17. Now here's the way Abraham responded. Abraham fell face down. Then he laughed and said to himself, can a child be born to a 100-year-old man? Can Sarah, a 90-year-old woman, give birth? So Abraham said to God, if only Ishmael were acceptable to you. So here's the man that God made a covenant with, and now he's saying, look, I'm 100 years old, Sarah's 90. And am I supposed to expect that I'm going to father a child and she's going to be the mother? She's 90-year-old. You think that God hadn't noticed? Abraham, he said, wouldn't. So at this point, he's saying, look, let's use Ishmael for my seed. Let's go through Ishmael. So the question is, why could not, and I didn't put a question mark there, I should have. Why could God not use Ishmael to pass the covenant down through? Why couldn't he? Why couldn't he have acquiesced to what Abraham said and used Ishmael? Why did it take somebody else? Because Ishmael was the work of the flesh, was the work of man. Isaac was the son of promise. So this is God's doing, because he's going to take a 90-year-old woman and she's going to get pregnant and have a baby. How many 90-year-olds you know that have babies? Have you ever known your whole life through the history of mankind? Then we go to Genesis. Now I'm going to slip on down to Genesis 21. We're getting to a landing spot here. Sarah became pregnant and bore a son to Abraham in his old age at the appointed time God had told him. Abraham named his son, who was born to him, the one Sarah bore to him, Isaac. Do you know what Isaac means? Laughter. Sarah heard God talking to Abraham when he and the two angels came by and they were going to Sodom and Gomorrah, and he said about her having a baby, and she laughed. And when she came out and he said, well, you laughed. I didn't laugh. He said, you did. I know you laughed. You thought that was funny. And so that's the way God would do it. So he named him Laughter. When his son Isaac was 8 days old, Abraham circumcised him as God had commanded him. Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. Okay, so we're saying three things that God has required of Abraham, and each time he is extended and given more than what he had done before. Which takes us 22nd chapter, which will wind us down pretty soon here. Genesis 22:1. After these things, God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham, here I am, he answered. Take your son, he said. Which son? Your only son. How many sons did Abraham have? He had two. Had Ishmael and Isaac. But he said, take your son, your only son, because he was the only son of promise. He was not the son. That was Sarah and Abraham's doing when it came to Ishmael. This was God's doing. He said, take your son, your only son, the one that's the son of the covenant, the one that's the son of promise. You take him. Now this is the one that he's told him that through Isaac your seed is going to be passed on and your generation is going to come. And look what he's telling him. You all know the story, but we'll read what it says here. Whom you love, go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains I will tell you about. Put yourself in Abraham's place. How would you have responded? I was 100 years old when this kid was born. Now they say, and I have no way of knowing for sure, that Isaac was, when we see him, we see the paintings and stuff of him, pictures, we see this little boy, but he was probably in his 20s by this time. So he wasn't just a little lad, is in my estimation, and a lot of people agree with me on that so far as that goes. So now he tells him, you take this son that I have promised you, that you have waited all this time to get. You were 100 years old when he was born, and now we're looking at the age you are now. You take this son, and you take him to this mountain that I'm going to show you in the land of Moriah. You go into this land, and you kill him, and you sacrifice him. Now you think that Abraham was tested up to this point? This was a test. But I'm not going to read all this because it take a lot more time. But when you follow the scripture that follows this, it says Abraham got up early the next morning, got Isaac, got a couple of men to go with him, and took off towards the mountain. When they got in the side of the mountain, he said, you fellas, you stay here. Isaac and I are going to that mountain to make a sacrifice, and we will return. You can read it for yourself. He said, we will return. What was he going up there for? To sacrifice his son. What was required of Abraham in order to ratify the covenant? Leave your home, shed the blood of animals, shed your own blood, and sacrifice your only son. your only begotten son. Does that sound familiar? Sacrifice your only son. We've just come through Christmas. Sacrifice. These are the four things that he asked of Abraham, and Abraham did each and every one of them. Why could he do that? And then we're going to go to the New Testament to get the answer. It says, by faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac. He received the promises, and he was offering his unique son. The one it had been said about, your seed will be traced through Isaac. He had told him, your seed's going through Isaac. Now he's told him to kill Isaac. And look what it says in 19. He considered God to be able even to raise someone from the dead, and as an illustration, he received him back. So in God's eyes, and God said, after, you can read this for yourself in the 22nd chapter, and God said he sacrificed his son. He didn't say he went to... Well, what happened when Abraham got up there on the mountain and got ready to sacrifice his son? What happened? An angel showed up and said, hey, hold on, Abraham. God was just testing you. If you look over here, there's a ram caught over here in the thicket. You take him and make a sacrifice. And so exactly what Abraham had told the men that he left there would happen. He and his son came back. What kind of faith does that take? Now do you know why God could use Abram, could change his name to Abraham, and why he could use him to pass his covenant through? So he goes through Abraham, he gets through to Isaac, and that's what we'll take up the next time. Are there any questions or comments?